All right, let's look at the setup for game 2 from Prep Test 60, which Prep Test 60 is June 2010. So June 2010, game 2. This is a sequencing linear game. The reason that I say that it's a little bit of both is clearly you're trying to put things in order, which is the case whenever you're doing a sequencing or a linear game. Most of the rules, 3 out of 4 of them, only give you the relationship between the things you're trying to put in order, and that's what you find in a sequencing game. The very last rule says that Geyer does not appear last, so that actually mentions the other variable set, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in this case. Uh, and that's why it's not a pure sequencing game, because you do benefit by drawing the spaces. So you kind of have to do a little bit of both in this game. I think we'll see more about what I mean when I say that as we go through the setup and into the questions. Let's look at the setup. So we have G, H, J, L, M, and P. And those are the 6 variables. They're actors. We need to put them in order. Okay? So the rules say Lin and Mitchell appear earlier than Henson. That's this rule here. Lin and Mitchell appear earlier than Henson. The next rule says Lin and Paredes appear earlier than Jelani. So Lin and Paredes are earlier than Jelani. And the next rule says if Mitchell appears earlier than Paredes, then Henson appears earlier than Geyer. So this is kind of an interesting rule because each of the components of the rule, well, it's a conditional rule, I should say. Okay, it's a conditional statement. And the sufficient condition is a sequencing rule, and the necessary condition is a sequencing rule. So what it's saying is that, if this sequencing element holds, the M before P, then the sequencing condition in the necessary condition, H before G, must also hold. And these come up relatively common, so you should make sure that you're comfortable writing a conditional rule where the sufficient condition is a sequencing element or a sequencing rule, and the necessary condition is also a sequencing rule. Okay, so let's look at what these sequencing rules that we have. Sorry, I should say the last rule is that Geyer does not appear last, and you would just put that in as a no-go for Geyer under spot 6, right? Can't go last. But as usual, these sequencing rules over here, they are also going to give rise to no-goes, places where variables cannot be placed. And so we need to be able to draw those out. And I feel like the rules here, they're, maybe one notch more complicated than just a straightforward sequencing rule where they tell you that A is before B. For example, in the first one, they tell us L and M are before H. All right. So if we just take that rule on its own, then we know that L cannot be last because H has to be afterwards. So that would be this no-go right here. Okay, and we also know that M cannot be last because H has to go afterwards. So that would be this no-go down here, the M, not the P, but the M. Okay, and we already had this one because they told us straight up that G could not go last. Okay, and then we do the H, and we're like H has to come after both L and M, which means there need to be at least 2 spaces to the left of H, because we need to leave those 2 spaces open for, at the very least, we need to leave 2 spaces open for L and M. So that means that H cannot be in first or second because we need to leave those 2 spaces open. All right, and then this rule over here. All right, we can start with the J, and we know that the J cannot go in 1 or 2 because it has to have at least L and P before it. So the J has the same, basically it has the same no-goes as the H, because just like the H, it has to have 2 variables to the left of it. And then, we notice the P is here, so the P has to have the J after, so the P can't be last. And here's what I think some students do miss, which is that the L shows up again. But we had already put a no-go down for L, right? Because we knew that L was going to come before H, but now we know that not only is L going to come before H, but L is going to come before J, which means there need to be at least 2 variables after the L. which means we actually should have two no-goes for L, one under 5 and one under 6. I have seen people miss this this one over here, the no-go for L under 5. Some people would, they would get the no-go, based on the fact that L had to be before H. They would say, okay, well, that means it can't be 6th. And then they would see this, and they would look at it, and they would be like, well, I already put that L can't be 6. So they would forget that, no, you need to add that on, because now we're adding another person who has to be after the L. All right. In terms of places where variables cannot go, this last rule doesn't give us anything because it's a conditional rule. So we don't know anything for sure, and that's why we can't generate any no-goes from it. Okay, so this would be your basic setup. Like I said, I think the no-goes that are arising from these kinds of rules are just like one notch maybe more difficult than a straight up sequencing rule where they give you like A before B. All right, let's look at some of the questions. So number 7 says, which one of the following could be the order from first to last in which the actors appear? So those of you who have done a good number of games will now be familiar with the fact that the first question on almost every game is a list question where they just give you 5 possible solutions to the game, and you need to figure out which one of those 5 solutions is actually a valid solution. In other words, which one follows all the rules. So what you can do when you're doing this is just basically take each of the rules, go through the answer choices, and get rid of any answer choices that violate that rule, then take the next rule, get rid of any answer choices that violate that rule, and so on. One thing I should have said that I didn't say yet was that this is either going to have to be in the 6th spot, is either going to have to be J or H. And the reason is because we generated so many variables that cannot go in 6th. We generated 4 of them, and we only have 6 variables to begin with, so there are actually only 2 possibilities for who can go 6. It's either going to be J or H. Okay, so now let's look at the answer choices for number 7 and do what I just mentioned we had to do, which is take a rule, get rid of all the answer choices that violate that rule, go to the next rule and do the same thing. So let's start at the top. Both Lynn and Mitchell appear earlier than Henson, so we have to have Lynn and Mitchell earlier than Henson. A checks out, B checks out, C does not check out because Henson is first, so we should get rid of C. D checks out, and E checks out. And I've said this before, but the way that this thing just played out, where we got rid of one answer choice based on one rule, that's normally what happens. But you need to be thorough so that even when you get rid of an answer choice based on a rule, you should still check the rest of the answer choices, because you never know when they're going to deviate from what they normally do and actually allow you to get rid of 2 answer choices based upon one rule. Okay, but so far we got rid of C. So let's look at let's look at the second rule. Both Lynn and Paredes appear earlier than Jelani. So we have to check A, B, D, and E. So A is out because Paredes comes after Jelani. We're going to be thorough and check the rest of them. Lynn and Paredes in B are before Jelani. In D, they're before Jelani. And same thing in E. So far we're down to B, D, and E. And we need to look at the last 2 rules. The next rule is that if Mitchell appears earlier than Paredes, then Henson appears earlier than Gayer. And if we're looking at our setup, it's this rule here. So we need to check B, D, and E for this rule. So the only way this rule is going to help us get rid of an answer choice is if M is indeed before P. So let's check. So in answer choice B, M is before P, which means H has to be before G. But that's actually not true because G is going to first. So we get rid of B. We're left with D and E. We check them both against this rule. And in D and E, you notice this rule does not apply. It's irrelevant because M is not before P. We have one more rule, and we need to get rid of one more answer choice, so that kind of works out. Let's figure out which one of D or E violates this last rule, that Gayer does not appear last. Most of you are ahead of me since I'm talking. D, it cannot be the right answer because Gayer appears last. So E is the answer on number 7. All right. Let's do number 8. Which one of the following cannot be true? So this is a question where they give us no extra information, and we just need to go based on our diagram and say what cannot be true. All right. And I should just say that when they ask you a question without giving you any extra information and they ask you what can't be true, a lot of times, a high percentage of the time, the answer to that question is going to come from the no-goes that you put down at the beginning of the game, because they're asking you who can't go somewhere. And so they have to come from your no-goes if you did your setup completely. I'm talking about a question where they don't give you any extra information, right? So we are looking for something that violates one of our no-goes, so we go down. Henson appears earlier than Gayer. There's no reason why that can't be true. Henson appears sixth. There's no-go for Henson under 6, so that could be true. Lynn appears fifth. There we go, right? Lynn can't be fifth. We put that down on our diagram here, and the reason was because both J and H have to come after Lynn. If Lynn were fifth, only one of them, there would only be room for one of J or H to go after Lynn. Okay, so that's number 8. Number 9, exactly how many of the actors are there, any of whom could appear sixth? So again, this is a question where they didn't give us any extra information. Okay, so we're just going off of our main diagram, and this is a question that we have already solved because we figured out ahead of time that there were 4 no-goes under spot 6, and so there are only 2 possibilities. So the answer here should be D, that there are 2 possibilities for who could be sixth. All right, and let's try to get, actually I'm going to stop the video here, and then I'll do the next 3 questions on the next video because I'm not going to have time to do them all in this video, and so I'll just spread them out evenly. All right, see you in the next video.